We want to kick things off, product philosophy, talking about product decisions.
Let's do it.
All right. The funny thing is, I somehow again have this idea of a spectrum here, which popped up last time, right? The spectrum of collaboration. But let's kick this off. So my question is, where do you think Zed falls on a spectrum between IDE and editor, from say Visual Studio to Nano? And where should it land?
IDEs have always had a certain connotation for me that comes from IDEs I've used in the past, which is they have a lot of features, but you always seem to have to pay for those features in the form of either sluggish UI or a cluttered UI or both. It seems like maybe JetBrains has done a better job like streamlining the look of their UI, but it still doesn't feel quite as fast as the vibe I would get in what traditionally I would call an editor. So something like Vim, or back in the day, like TextMate. I just remember the contrast between text, like, early in my career writing Ruby and TextMate, where, there wasn't a lot of help, but it was at least fast. And then, eventually adopting RubyMine or whatever and getting all that power, but just being so frustrated with the latency. So it's always been this trade-off. And my dream has always been to have both, to have a tool that was incredibly powerful, but also had a sleek, minimal vibe and super fast. And those are tough to combine. I mean, sort of spent like most of my career trying to get to the point where we could combine them. But that's the goal. But I always want to err on the side of minimalism in the UX. And the analogy I always use was like on the Model S Teslas, where you walk up and the door handle like pops out of the side. So it's like tucked away when it would create drag, but then available at just the right moment. That's the dream.
So performance, as many features as possible, but not at the cost of performance or minimalism or bloat or something.
Yeah, not at the cost of slowness and noise. Like keep my code front and center and don't introduce latency between the fundamental act that I'm trying to achieve, which is editing that code, right? Like that fundamental experience needs to be fast no matter what.
Antonio, do you want to add something?
Yeah, a couple of thoughts. Like one thought is just, the first programming language that I picked up was C#. And I used to be a Windows user, so I remember like opening Visual Studio, not Visual Studio Code, this is, OG Visual Studio, and like they had this loading screen because like the startup time was so slow that like it would be like Visual Studio 2005, whatever, loading, DLL 1, 2, 3, blah, blah. So that was, same as Nathan, like the contrast from that to using, I think it was TextMate that I used after that was insane. I think like the distinction between IDE and editor, I don't know, I haven't really thought about, why, it exists. To me, like, I don't know, like I would love to have all the features of an IDE, and I think it is possible for an editor to have all those features. The theory I have, and I just formulated this theory, so it's not very well thought through, is that I think it is possible to combine them all. It's just that, I don't know, my sense is that those slow IDEs are just the result of, tacking things on, adding things on top, like bolting them on. It's like, oh, we could have this feature, okay, let's add it. We could have this other feature, okay, let's add it. And like, then you end up with a list of like check boxes and like things that are not really, integrated with one another. So you have all these features, but they're not, thought through vertically. I don't know if that's true or not, but that's always the impression I had. Oh, let's add another checkbox, but it's not really like, the vibe we're going for with Zed.
Yeah, I guess the thing is, maybe it was a trick question, because this line between IDE and editor, it's not that clear cut anymore, is it? Like 10 years, 15 years ago, you had Nano, right? No language aware features, not even syntax highlighting. I don't think Nano ever had syntax highlighting. Or wasn't there Nano X? Not sure. But none of that, and then Visual Studio on the other side. And now with language servers, tree sitter, all of this stuff that you can plug into editors, things have changed. And I guess the interesting bit is, where do we want to land? Like what you said, Nathan, like which trade-offs do we want to make, and what things will we not adopt that an IDE has, or what things, do we want to adopt?
I think the situation has improved a lot since the time when there was a really big distinction between editors and IDEs. I think the language server protocol helped a lot. TreeSitter helps some for the editor to be like smarter than have a like basic awareness of syntax. For me, like I think the architecture we're at, where the editor has like syntax awareness, and then for like semantic understanding, we call out to a language server that like is not coupled to any one editor, is a pretty good architecture. And that's kind of how, Vim, when people say editor versus IDE, usually like in the editor camp, they're talking about Vim and Emacs is like the quintessential editor, but even those tools now have LSP support and TreeSitter inside. So I kind of think we're like converging on a better design where like editors have syntax awareness, and not just Zed, but editors in general. But I still think like there's improvements to be made. Like one thing that, I'm thinking about UX that I still enjoy in IDEs, even though it's not like it wouldn't make me use them, but like I still enjoy the act of like renaming a variable in IntelliJ, and like it highlights it, you're editing, and it's like live editing the names in the other places. And I remember that was the thing when we implemented rename in Zed. That was the thing in my mind. I was like, that's a pretty cool thing that they do with all their built-in language analysis. And we like explored doing it. We have this combination of syntax awareness with TreeSitter, and then like a rename call that we can do to a language server. And that, like, I think for the most part, that's a pretty good, it gives you what you want. It doesn't quite let us do all the fancy stuff that IDEs do, but maybe there's like room for expanding what TreeSitter can do and what the language server can do to like let us, do things like that.
So do you
nicer.
think, say performance wasn't an issue, and say it could be tucked away, to use Nathan's analogy, is there anything that comes to mind from the IDE world that you would never add to Zed because you think this does not fit in here? This is not a Zed editor thing, this is an IDE type of thing.
Not that I can think of. I just like, the term IDE just always seemed weird to me. Like,
Yeah.
but I get the distinction, but I don't know. It's a code editor. You're just trying to get work done. I guess. So to integrate the development environment, I guess. I mean, one thing we're adding is like, I think, if we're, whatever it means to integrate the development environment, but one thing that a lot of IDEs don't do a good job integrating into the development experience is the fact that other people exist and that we're collaborating. So like, I think we're kind of continuing that IDE vision by integrating yet more concerns. Because that's the idea of an IDE, right? It's not like I edit over here and then I got my terminal and I'm switching back and forth and I'm using this like hodgepodge of tools. It's all combined into one experience. And so I think collaboration could be included in that. But no, the only thing I want to ditch from IDEs is the slowness and the and the buttons everywhere. Yeah.
So okay, that's interesting. That means when you're saying you want to integrate all of it at basically no cost, that's the goal, right? No performance cost, no clutter cost. So there's this other spectrum of editors, and I would say on one end there's Emacs, on the other end there's Vim, and there's multiple in between, of course. But on Emacs, the one end is, to me, editor as the operating system. You have this one thing and you do everything in there. And that is the force multiplier. Because you are always in Emacs and your shell is in Emacs, your compiler runs in Emacs, your emails, your coffee machine, everything's in Emacs, means you never have to leave it and you're much more productive, right? Writing emails, cooking coffee. Vim, on the other hand, there was this article, I think it was by now 10 years ago, somebody was saying Unix as the IDE. Vim is the one tool in this environment of other tools, and that's where its power comes from. It's just one of many tools. So what you're saying, that you want to integrate more, does that mean you're tending more towards the Emacs side of things and saying the power comes from us putting more stuff into Zed, for example, collaboration? So, it's
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to like the I want to surface like the fact that a command line exists, and
yeah,
like I like that world. I hate the world of there's some esoteric project file that has all of the details. Like that's very Xcode, right? Where like
interesting.
Xcode proj or whatever, and like everything is done via this like point and click. I don't know.
Yeah,
So like
yeah,
that I don't want. So maybe that's an answer to that earlier question
yeah,
of
yeah.
like I don't want like to replace the command line experience with buttons. Like that I don't
Yes.
think is a big deal. Like I like being close to the machine and communicating with the machine linguistically. But I would also like if, I don't know, so I want the IDE to be aware of and integrated cleanly with the fact that there is a terminal and there is a command line, and avoid the state where we try to like define everything in this visual paradigm. Be a natural outgrowth of Unix, the Unix philosophy, and complement it, I think, is more my speed. But
Yeah.
yeah, if I can like hit a single key binding instead of switching to the terminal, hitting up and hitting enter to run a test, which like Kirill and Pyotr are working on, I'll take it. But like, I don't want it hidden from me the fact that that's just running a command.
Yeah, that's a
I
good
like
instinct.
that bare bones vibe,
Yeah,
but
I
just be
think that
productive in it.
that's. I think that might also be one thing that I associated with IDEs, in that you just boot it up and then you hit that green play button and you don't know what happens, but somebody told you this is how you run it, and then when something goes wrong, you don't know what exactly happened there. It feels
Right.
like
So I don't
this
want
is.
magic. Sorry.
Yes, yeah, no, yeah, that's what you don't want, right? You don't want this abstracted away and hidden, but you want it cleanly supported. Yeah. Anything to add, Antonio, Max? Emacs versus Vim, where does it land? Where does Zed land?
Yeah, not much to add. I think that I don't want to abstract away. Like Nathan said, I don't think we want to abstract away things like Git and cargo test. But I also think there's times when like the most efficient way to use a tool is not through the command line. I think, and I'm a little skeptical of the like Unix as the IDE vision, where it's like you're fat, like that the fastest possible user experience for anyone, no matter how good their muscle memory is to like shell out to like code, like if they want to look up something, like shell out to do a command line search for it. I
Yeah.
think that often we're gonna, by integrating into the tool, you can kind of have a faster keyboard driven workflow than having to, and anything you could do with like a terminal editor running in a terminal.
Yeah.
But I mean, I don't think we're going to be building an email client into Zed. I could see building an email client in GUI because they all drive me crazy.
I can see how.
I mean, it's definitely not at the top of the list, and it would come. Those kinds of things would come. I would be very careful before adding them because I would worry they would dilute our focus. So, if it become extensible enough such that someone could build an email client, like cool. But that seems like a ways out and not our priority at all. Our priority is writing software.
And how do extensions fit in? Because I do think that there might be a danger of extensions ruining this concept, where you add so many extensions and then people say this is now slow. There's like 15,000 buttons in the UI, and then every company has like a Z default plugin configuration, and we end up with 50,000 buttons, and it takes 30 seconds to boot up. Like, how do you see extensions coming into this here?
I think it'll be I don't want to say there's anything that we won't let extensions do, but I definitely think there's going to be our first several like milestones with extensions is going to be more about like plugging into existing Zed features and obviously the first one, adding languages, but I think also things like we're adding this task system and extensions that like help you discover tasks to run and expose them to you. So there's like an existing workflow all users of Zed have, and the extension enriches. Like I think that's there's a lot of mileage we can get out of that. Or extensions letting you kind of script workflows that are unique to you. Like opening files, looking for certain types of code in certain files, doing things with your cursor in certain files, making edits that you personally make you more productive. That's like my priority with extensions right now, and less like adding any new UI or like building an email client, building a concept that doesn't even exist in Zed using extensions. I think is something we may do, but it's not. I don't know. It's not going to be like. Whereas like with Atom, from the start, everything was an extension. So like everything we did had to be doable via an extension. It's a different approach than that.
And I really think. Oh, Antonio,
Go ahead.
I don't think that having a lot of extensions has to be slow, but that is going to involve carefully engineering the APIs and how we run extensions. Like they're going to be running isolated in their own WebAssembly runtime on their own thread. I do think if we ever put an extension, and I don't know that we ever will, but if we ever did, like say we would put an extension on the critical path of typing, so that like maybe it could inspect every character you were inserting and do something. I would always want to, if we ever did that, put like a deadline around it. I think I've talked about this in other scenarios, like where there are explicit performance bounds that the extension author has to hit, or we just like disable the extension. So I think there are ways now, and then when you're saying like thousands of buttons, like that's another matter. But again, when we add those extension points where we allow buttons to be surfaced, that's going to require us thinking pretty carefully about how to tuck those things away and avoid chaos. But at least from performance, like the problem with Atom was we just like ran people's extensions on the main thread. Like, goodbye.
Require.
We're not going to make that mistake again. Yeah. Antonio, you were trying to jump in.
Oh yeah, I think one example that comes to mind, and one could say a lot of things about macOS API. I certainly could say a lot of things about macOS APIs. Interacting with them is a nightmare sometimes. But if you think about an iPhone and like an application on an iPhone, there's no way you can like go in the home screen and kind of clutter the base experience, right? And I really like that. It's like, okay, you have a lot of flexibility, right? But it's in places where like don't degrade the overall experience. And so yeah, like Nathan was saying, like it's gonna be like not only an engineering effort, I think also like a UX effort of understanding like what those extension points are, what those seams are, and where to plug them. But yeah, I like the idea of doing it the Apple way in that sense.
But I mean, that's really hard, no? In that the that's also hard, but the easy way would be to just restrict a lot of things and say extensions can only do this and this and that. But I do think, I think Nathan, you mentioned it last time, that we do want something like scriptability, right? And we do have things like presetter which allow you to really, in a nice way, modify the code or script around it. So we want to expose some of this, but isn't that really hard to find that exact spot where you give enough power without the whole thing falling over?
I don't know, I'm feeling pretty bullish about our current design of using WebAssembly, and eventually we could do the same thing in like a V8 isolate, or presumably Python has their own equivalent if we ended up going that way. Our whole application's multi-threaded. We have a real clear distinction between the main thread and the rest. We have shared memory concurrency. So yeah, it's hard. We've put a lot of investment into the technical choices we've made to make it doable, at least from a performance perspective. But yeah, I don't take it lightly. But I also think that like we are positioned to do it well if we think carefully as we proceed. From a design perspective, but yeah, it's hard. Building APIs, we really learned that with Atom, of just like having an extension API is really hard. Versioning it, evolving it, it's all challenging, but I think having done it once before and made a lot of mistakes, we're pretty well positioned to avoid those mistakes, and the foundation that we have is pretty solid.
So when you then say scriptability, what do you have in mind? Like what would be, let's take a step back, sorry. I do think with the stuff that Zed has and TreeSitter, I think there's a lot of powerful stuff you can build on top of it, or in extensions, if that stuff were exposed. And I'm wondering, what do you have in mind? What do you think would be the first big milestone for scriptability or extensions or something like that?
I mean, and it being possible would be great because there's a lot of people that want that.
Yeah.
So that's one thing.
So that means just, the ability to modify text with TreeSitter APIs or syntactic aware APIs or something like that.
Yeah. I don't even know how syntactically aware Emmet needs to be, but obviously it would be potentially helpful in making sure that we're doing these expansions in this particular example in a context where it makes sense. I mean, yeah, the hard part for me is like my imagination runs a little short on this because like I don't need to write any extensions since I can just do whatever I want to do, like, write in the editor. But maybe you guys have better ideas like off the top of your head. For me, it's a val. What I like about it is that I don't know what people are going to do with it. Although that is challenging. Like you do need to build an API with something in mind for what people can do. So specific use cases, I haven't maybe spent enough time thinking about them. Max, do you have any more, having dug in and started working on it?
Yeah, for scripting, I mean, I can imagine myself wanting to have like simple commands that I might run where I would like, I'm in a pane editing some file and I run a command and it uses a combination of TreeSitter and like grep to like look for tests for the file that I'm in and like open them up in another pane in a split or something, and like put my cursor, just like, scroll the view to show the test or yeah, things like that, like searching for things in the project, searching for things in a buffer, searching using regexes, searching using syntax, positioning cursors, maybe doing edits. I feel like there's like I can think of a lot you could do with like a pretty small number of APIs like that, where if you can open a pane, you can find the open pane, you can do a search. I'm imagining at different code bases, people would have certain things that they do a lot. Like, maybe if you're working, I don't know, like on a Rails code base and you want to like open I don't even remember now, controller tests for the controller scripts in Vim that would do stuff like that. And it would be a lot of times with just grep, it would be done. And stuff like that I want to make really, because I think that is important for people's productivity. And I think it's like pretty low hanging in that like, you don't need to build custom UI for it. You just need these like ability to manipulate editors and panes. And it's really, a lot of the productivity in scripting is around like core features like that. I want to do a good job with those APIs.
One issue that came up, I think, a couple of weeks back, where some user was saying, I want Zed to be able to execute any function that I have my cursor on. And then the first reaction from a bunch of us was, what? What does that mean? But I think now that we've talked with the user, I think what they want is similar to, I think, what you have in Emacs, where you could put your cursor on any S expression and then say evaluate this. And that's where I think we could do something like this with TreeSitter, right? You could say, I'm in a Ruby file, so now when I hit this key binding, evaluate the expression or the biggest block or whatever it is that I have my cursor in.
Right.
So that stuff would be really cool, this interactive evaluation of code, syntax
Right.
aware.
Like bringing in Kyle Kelly, like he's been playing around with just like a couple days with what does it look like to get Jupyter runtime support. Where you could, so what would the extension API look like for that? It might not be like everything you need to build the Jupyter integration, but it might be like, oh, this exists, and you can reach out and grab TreeSitter and call this other API to evaluate an appropriate runtime. Yeah, that would be awesome. And for me, the thing I've always thought is just like the ability for people to just solve their own problems is going to scale much better long term, I think, than us trying to solve everybody's problems for them. That just doesn't scale. And we could build, a version of Zed for Python and a version of Zed, like I think JetBrains takes that path. But I'd much rather build one tool that is flexible enough for people to make their own. That was the same dream behind Atom. We just took it, we turned the dial to 11 And which I'd love to get the dial to 11, but maybe it gets to 11 in year 4 instead of year 1. Like we sort of incrementally get there while holding our other values constant.
And I do think, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong here, but there's this, I don't know why I'm thinking in terms of these axes, but batteries included versus nothing at all, right? You Zed out of the box right now understands a lot of languages, understands a lot of language servers. People call it out and they say, nice, I opened Zed the first time in my TypeScript project and it immediately did autocomplete and all of this. Super cool. Do you think there's a limit to that where, you know, this is the core subset of batteries included, but no more than 8 batteries, 10 batteries is a little bit too much, something like this. The rest you have to go with extensions. I mean, and again, like I think the hard part here might be everybody needs a different battery, right, for whatever they're doing. But what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah. For me, like, whenever we include something in the editor, I feel like we're making a promise that's going to work a certain way. And so, like, basically, like, classifies as core is like things that we can, you know, uphold, where we can uphold that promise to our users. Yeah, everything else, I don't know, it's like, I mean, and of course, yeah, like you said, everybody needs types, you know, different types of batteries, and, you know, yeah, I'm not sure, like, yeah, where to draw the line.
I think that is where you draw it, though. Yeah, it's just like, it is not humanly possible, and we want to grow our team, but even if we do grow our team, like, it's just not possible for our team to cover everything. Like, but it is possible for us to cover a lot, and at the end of the day, people just want an editor that works the way they want it to work. Yeah. I think, like, I don't know, I guess there is a subset of people that really get off on, like, you know, engineering their own keyboard out of wood with, like, doing their own soldering and then customizing their editor. You know, they just want an editor toolkit and put it all together. But I think the vast majority of people, kind of me included, would be happier if they just turn it on and it works. So yeah, that's kind of, we're trying to find the right balance there. I think, like, we took a lot of languages into core because we didn't have extensibility quite ready. Some of those we're going to be spinning back out because it's just like the quality of that experience is going to be higher if people other than us are maintaining it. So it really just boils down to that. Like, I think, Antonio, you got to it great. Like, can we, and we're not, yeah, we're going to try, but, like, you know, we may drop the ball from time to time, like forget to update a language server to the latest version, or we're not using the right one. But, like, I think that's the right attitude. Like, if it's in the core, then it should be good, and we're maintaining that. And there's only so many of us, so many hours in the day.
Did you have this principle, say, 8 weeks ago, or was this newly formed when we hit, you know, the open sourcing of Zed and all of the issues came in and the pull requests?
Oh, we knew it would be like this.
Yeah.
I did. Yeah. It's why extensibility was, like, pretty high up in the roadmap, because, and Linux as well, both of those, because those are both kind of like, we knew people would want to get it working on Linux, and whether we liked it or not, or, you know, scheduled it then or not, people were going to attempt to contribute on that front. So we wanted to be receptive to that. And then we knew that people were going to attempt to contribute things that, yeah, Jason Rudolph, who used to work with us on Atom, said, like, yeah, open source contributions are sometimes like someone giving you a free puppy. And, like, so it's like scheduling the extensibility now is very deliberate, which is like, we knew we didn't want to delay open source on that stuff being ready. But we knew, like, pretty soon we'd need kind of an escape valve for free puppies that we just couldn't adopt.
And also, I want to add on top of that, that's not to say that if something's in the core, you know, it's still an open source project. Like, people can still help us maintain, you know, improve the quality of that. Yeah. It's just like, yeah, the barrier to entry, I guess, is going to be a little higher. You know, we're gonna feel more responsible about maintaining, you know, a certain type of quality. For anything that goes into core.
So I don't know how to formulate this, and then it sounds, I mean it less controversial than it sounds, but
okay.
We've all been involved in this one issue where the key bindings were changed from the Zed key bindings to the VS Code key bindings. Yes. So this was yesterday, right? Yes, yesterday. Default key binding changed to one that was more VS Code like. And I do think, you all powered through or are powering through. I don't know if you changed it locally.
Still powering
Yeah.
through. Yeah.
Powering through, never give up.
But I think it brings up an interesting question where, would you ever tell a user, not in these words, but through the product, that, hey, the way you've been doing it is wrong, or here's a better way? When somebody says, hey, here's something we should build in the editor, like, I don't know, I want to show pictures next to my code so I can type off code of pixelated JPEGs or whatever it is. I don't know. Dumb example. Is this something where you would say, no, we found a better way to do this. This is not something we want in here. Or would you always say, whatever you want, like you want a shortcut to duplicate a line 5,000 times and that's built in, go for it. Does anything come to mind here where you say, this is our philosophy of text editing and we know what it is, and if, there's stuff that can bump against it and that we don't want in Zed?
I think for me, I like to not. In that instance of the switching our bindings to be more like VS Code, even though it was going to be painful for all of us, like for me, what won out was like if there's something that we can just be compatible with, such that we don't have to explain anything to anyone, someone is going to show up and it's just going to just work for them with no explanation from us needed. I value that really highly, and that's why even though I think the key bindings I don't like our new default key bindings as much. Like, we basically added a key binding for Alt Up back when I don't think that conflicted with anything, and VS Code didn't have a default binding for select larger syntax node. That's an example that I'm keep bumping up against. And so we picked one, but now the VS Code ships with that feature, and they have a default binding for it. I think it makes sense for us to use it, because it's still, if someone really hates it, if they can customize it. I might have to do that because I'm not able so far to get used to the VS Code one. But I really do value being just sort of compatible with any standards that exist. Not that VS Code is a standard, but it's just it's a lot of people.
75% of the market or something. Like,
yeah.
So
if there's something like that we can just work with, I'm gonna err on the side of kind of adopting that, being standard, fitting in with the ecosystem.
But then there's other things, right? Like VS Code's, I don't think they have yet added multi-buffers. And like, that's our find experience. And I just like that better personally than like a little menu, like panel at the bottom where it's showing you locations and you're jumping around. So we decided to buck the trend on that one, and we paid for it a little bit. There's some people that don't even understand that those things are editable. Like, they don't, it's a little less familiar. It's different. So it's not like we're never willing to I think I'll be pretty disappointed if we just build like a faster clone of VS Code. We have our own things to express, but it needs to be like clearly better or clearly really matter to what we're trying to express to deviate that much from what people expect. But I think you were also asking, like, how receptive are we to kind of different ways of doing things? And I think it's going to be case by case. I don't think we'll add a duplicate 5 times command anytime soon.
The multi-buffer, I think, is a perfect example. And the other thing with the tree sitter select larger and smaller syntax node, I don't think VS Code has this, right? They don't have the syntax node.
Well, they do now. That was what disrupted me so much, is this person opened a PR, which I think was a good change that they suggested, that they said VS Code now has these bindings by default, select larger syntax node. So Zed should use the same. So, but yes, but when we first built Zed, that wasn't a thing in VS Code.
Yeah, I guess, say you have, the multi-buffer is a great example, but say you have the ability to select, I don't know, you can jump to the start of a block and then you can hit something else to jump to the end of the block, and then that way you could select the whole block or something like this. And then guess what? With tree sitter, you don't even have to do this. You can just in the block say, select me this outer scope or something like this. And that to me is an example of, hey, we found a better way to do this. And now if somebody were to come along and say, hey, I want this other way to be built in first class, And that is, the question of would we then push back and say, no, actually, we think this is a better way. But what you said about the multi-buffer sounds like if we are confident we found a better way to do something, then this is what we want to do.
Yeah, I do think we have a perspective about how we want, what we want envisioned for code UX, and it's not. I want to be standard when there's a one-to-one thing to standard to adopt, but there often isn't. Like multi-buffers is maybe one of our biggest concepts that doesn't exist in other editors.
Yeah, like I've never worn the badge opinionated as like a super big badge of honor. Because like I tend to find people that are opinionated kind of annoying. So like I don't want to be like, oh, we're so opinionated, we have an opinion on everything and there's a way to do it and you got to do it our way. Like that's not how I want to be. But I also don't want to be like a slave to how it's always been done. I want to be willing to innovate and go out on a limb. I don't mind like there being redundant ways of doing things. Like if there's a way that people are used to doing things that maybe is working for them better than our better way, like I would entertain it as long as it's, but I don't think I would like have an alternative to the multi-buffers for fine that I would want to maintain just because some people preferred that. Like that's a pretty big feature. I want to do it that way. So I feel like it's a case by case thing, but I'm not really here to like ram my way of doing everything down people's throats. Like, I want to innovate and say, here's a good way, I think, of doing things and that we're excited about. But that aura of like exclusivity or being a know-it-all that is going to tell you how you should code. I don't know. I'm not that. I'm not rotating too hard on that. But there are some things I think that we found that are cool. Multi-buffers being one of them. Of like, this is just in many cases a great way of fixing a lot of compile errors. So I want people to try it. I don't know. Maybe that's a red flag for people. Like I'm not opinionated enough, but yeah.
I don't think so.
Okay.
It just means we can't expect a webinar from Nathan of the best way to edit text or something like this.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not even using modal bindings these days because I used Vim for a while and I got used to that. But then we wrote Atom and I had to go back to the Emacs style bindings. And I just like never... Yeah, I kind of put up with making that switching cost of the muscle memory to Vim just to get like an editor I didn't hate back then. But so yeah, I don't know. Am I the text editing ninja of the universe? It's unclear. No.
Yeah.
You got two keyboards though in Borak, so I mean that's
true.
Like pretty ninja to me.
Yeah, I used the Borak.
This week, Antonio and I were pairing, and my Vim muscle memory is pretty strong. And I don't know if you know this, but in Vim, he's already laughing, but in Vim, sometimes stuff is weird because you have registers, and when you delete text, it gets put in your clipboard and stuff like this. And I subconsciously grown aware of this, where I do weird things where I paste the thing first versus deleting something else because deleting something else might overwrite my clipboard and whatnot. And Antonio was watching me when I went into a buffer, and I just wanted to place the whole content, but what I did was I jumped to the end, pasted my stuff there, then went back up, selected the top half of the buffer, and then selected this. And there was a pause, and he just goes, "Can you do Command A and paste it?" And then we had to do it 2 minutes later, and I did it his way, and he's like, "Thank you." I realized how awkward it was what I was doing. But I have another question. Is there anything that 3 years ago you said this will be in Zed, but you dropped it because you realized this does not make sense or it doesn't fit in?
No, we added chat like really early, and then realized like, okay, we're not even editing in this thing yet. What are we doing? So we
too much right now.
We burned a couple weeks on that. I just got really excited about collaboration, and I don't know. I wanted to explore it, but it was just not the right time. But now it's back. Still a little unloved, although people from the community, I saw someone Everson opened a pull request improving it, which was cool to see. So that was one thing. Have we dropped anything else?
I don't know.
Yeah, there's some stuff I'd like to drop from like the implementation still. Like the way that we serialize workspaces, I'd like to be simpler, but nothing from a product perspective so far.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah, but we have so much to build. It's like,
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, it's like skipping a meal when you're already starving to death or something. I don't, yeah, so it's like,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. Is there anything you'd like to remove, Torsten?
Oof. No.
Yeah.
No, removal. I discovered the journal mode that you apparently added, Nathan, 2 days ago.
Yeah.
By accident.
Nice.
I just typed journal in the command thing, and then I realized, what? There's a journal mode? And I looked at the git blame, and I saw that you added it. And also, fun fact, that's just 150 lines, right? It's one file that does all of this in Rust. That was pretty cool.
Yeah, and it's not like the world's greatest journal or anything. It's just like create a new entry, that has a
Yeah.
timestamp with directory structure a certain way. It works for
Yeah.
me. I added it like
But
before anybody was even using Zed just because I need it. Yeah.
I do think that's interesting because it doesn't take up anything. It doesn't cost anything. It's just you can type journal in, and if you want it, you can get it. Otherwise, it doesn't hurt you.
But like that's an example of something that should probably be an extension, I think, at
Yeah.
some point. Or if it weren't an extension, I would want to like go harder on it and really build like a more full-fledged journaling experience into Zed and have it. But it seemed, yeah, one or the other. Probably the former. Probably just make it into an extension in the short term.
Yeah.
But it's like not doing that much harm, right? It's 150 lines of code, but most people don't know about it. We don't really advertise it, right? Yeah.
What I find interesting is more these little small decisions that come up again and again. For example, do we add emojis, to the chat, or emoji reactions? There's like these small decisions that can have a huge impact, or reactions or something to like collaboration nodes, right? Where somebody could leave a thumbs up or something. Or do we display images? Is Markdown by default rendered or always enabled? And I think, I don't know, I see these come by in pull requests, and I find it really hard. I find it easy to overthink them, right? It's, does this put us in a different direction? Instead of emojis, should we have pixelated emojis? Is this more in line with the aesthetic of, something like this? But yeah, I don't know. I think it's really hard to find a principle that you can hold through all of these decisions.
I agree. And yeah, and I would be lying if I said I had it all figured out and all in my head. I think we're all just finding our way. And the code you own ends up owning you. So like that's one thing I'm just cognizant of is like as we add these things, these are things that when we change the foundation on which that thing is built, now we have to go visit it and deal with it. It just adds surface area and mass. So that's one thing. And then yeah, that's interesting. Emoji, that sounds good to me, other than we have to maintain it and keep it working.
Yeah.
But those specific examples sound good, but it just seems like something we'll have to figure out as we go. Yeah, I guess I'd like to be as big a tent as possible and be inclusive and include a lot of people's workflows without being a Frankenstein. And that's a tough balance to strike. But maybe we could sort of overcorrect in one direction, add something in and just realize we can't have this anymore. It's kind of tough to take it away because now it's kind of you're taking something away from people. But if you're willing to do that, then you're willing to kind of take more risk as well in what you add. So yeah, I don't want to be ill-considered. And I still think there are ways where parts of Zed can be better resonant with other parts of Zed, and there could be a more holistic product vision. Although I can't come up with any specific examples right now, so there's that. But yeah, so I want it to feel like a holistically thought through, well-designed product. And so sort of the more we expand our surface area and the faster we do that, the more challenging it will be. But I'm willing to kind of get there. Sort of add stuff and then integrate it. That's where my head's at. And we'll see if that ends up being a good idea and how that works out. And we can adjust. That's where my head's at now.
Cool. I think that's it, right? We're coming up on time. Does anybody else want to add anything? Never coffee machine support in Zed. My name stands behind this.
Only if it's an espresso machine.
There you go.
Then
Foot pedal support in Zed.
Yeah, like one crazy thing that someone's brought up and I thought about too is like, could we embed, the platform specific browser so that people could like pull up a tab that's pointing at the site that they're building or something.
Yeah.
And that's one example of like web technology is slow, so I don't want to bring it in. But then that does have utility. So like, I don't know. I think that is potentially pretty cool and like, but I don't know. Yeah. There's no like, yeah, you could maybe list some outlandish things that I would say like, yeah, I don't know. It doesn't seem like we need coffee machine support in Zed, that's for sure. But
Nice.
yeah.
That's cool. I think it's, I don't know, I'm just from my understanding, the way I see it, it sounds like you have pretty strong principles, right? And from that, the rest flows, as in what you said about extensions. I think it says a lot when you say an extension only has this amount of time to do something. Otherwise, it's disabled or we ignore the result or something like this. Because
Right.
that already says a value is performance, a value is speed, latency. And that, I think, then ripples through the rest of the system or the rest of the community.
Like, I don't want it to be the ideal that our North Star is like, you can't make your Zen slow. Like,
Yes.
because ultimately the buck stops with us. And so it's like, if that means that you can't add a feature because the author of that feature, like, just didn't have the skill or the time or whatever to, like, meet the deadline, then, like, I'd rather you have a faster Zed with fewer extensions, than letting us get to a point where we bog down and then we're like, oh, well, you installed too many extensions. It's just like, I don't want that to be a state you can get to. So I hope we can stick to that.
Yeah. That's cool. The other thing I noticed is this week, or basically today, it changes things when you have such an engaged community. In that, I think in the worst case, you put some stuff in, it goes out into the world. You don't know if anybody uses it. You don't know whether you can remove it, cannot remove it. You don't know if it slows somebody's machine down. But in this case, I changed something 2 weeks ago, and today people were saying, like, "Hey, do you think this is the right decision? Can we change this back? What do you think about this? What do you think about that?" And this constant form of feedback also changes because you have feedback suddenly. You can make these decisions, and it's not just we added all of this stuff and we didn't know that it boots up in 18 seconds for people because we don't use 42 extensions or something like this. So I find it interesting. The community has this form of feedback and seeing how the product is used in the real world.
I love that. Yeah. I mean, we need the engagement of the community because, like, I don't know. I don't even have my head wrapped around everything that's going on in Zed right
Yeah.
now. And
There's
like,
a lot.
people are going to be able to put a lot more thought into particular nuances than I might be able to. So thanks everybody that's listening to this.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Thank you for doing this. I think we're at time, right?
Sounds good.
Yeah.
Cool. Nice.
Namaste.
bye.
Thank you.